They thought burning down my family's century-old fishing lodge would break me until I walked into that emergency board meeting with a manila folder that made their president's face drain of all color. Picture this: 3:15 a.m. flames reaching 40 feet into the Carolina sky. My great-grandfather's handcrafted rods melting in a boathouse that had weathered 4 generations of storms, the bitter smoke of burning cedar mixing with my wife's tears as she watched our heritage turn to ash. Our HOA president, Victoria Sterling, arrived at sunrise with her morning latte, actually photographing the destruction like a tourist at a landmark. Fast forward 8 months, same woman, packed town hall, news crews rolling, me walking down that center aisle with a manila folder containing $924,000 worth of evidence that would destroy her perfect world. When I opened it and started reading those bank statements aloud, her million-dollar composure shattered like cheap glass. See, they made one fatal mistake. They got so drunk on their own power, so confident in their little empire, that they forgot I'm the kind of man who doesn't just get angry, I get strategic. What was in that folder? A paper trail so damning it sent 4 people to federal prison and sparked the largest HOA fraud investigation in North Carolina history. But before we dive in, I need you to do something. Drop a comment telling me what you'd do if your HOA literally tried to erase your family's legacy. And let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this neighborhood tyranny has spread across our country. My name's Jerome Washington, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest worry was whether the old pier needed new planks before tourist season. Funny how fast your world can implode when powerful people decide you don't belong in their vision of paradise. Washington's fishing lodge sits on 35 acres of pristine lakefront in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. My great-grandfather, Samuel Washington, built the first cabin in 1923 with nothing but determination and the kind of stubborn pride that runs in our bloodline like DNA. He was one of the few black men in the region who managed to purchase waterfront property during an era when such ownership was practically forbidden. 11 weathered cabins now dot our shoreline, each one aged to that perfect silver gray that screams authentic mountain experience to city folks hungry for something real. My wife Diana runs the front office with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the warmth of Sunday dinner at Grandma's house. Our 17-year-old daughter Zoe and 15-year-old son Marcus spend summers maintaining trails and teaching urban kids how to cast a line without hooking themselves. We're not getting rich. Hell, some seasons we barely stay afloat, but we're nurturing 4 generations of families who've been coming here since their great-grandparents were young. Most of our regular guests are black families from Atlanta, Charlotte, and Washington, D.C., people who found in our lodge what they couldn't find elsewhere, a place where their children could run free without judgment, where their money was welcomed without suspicion, where their history was respected instead of erased. Then came 2020, and with it, Mountain Vista Estates. The developer promised luxury mountain living that honored local heritage. What we got was a gated fortress of 7 500-square-foot McMansions, each one more pretentious than the last, filled with people who seemed to view our lodge the way someone might view a homeless encampment that had overstayed its welcome. Worse, the developer's attorneys created a mandatory HOA that somehow, and I'm still not entirely sure how this was legal, covered both their new development and our existing property. Welcome to modern America, where your rights can evaporate faster than morning mist on the lake. The HOA fees hit us like a sledgehammer to the chest. Residents paid $450 monthly. We paid $3,200 as a commercial property. The promise was to preserve the area's natural character while ensuring property values for all stakeholders. Beautiful words that meant absolutely nothing, as I'd soon discover. Enter Victoria Sterling, HOA president, and the human embodiment of everything wrong with unchecked authority. 55 years old, corporate lawyer from Atlanta, married to Richard, a retired investment banker, who looked like he'd never done a day of honest work in his life. She drove a pearl-white BMW, wore clothes that cost more than most people's rent, and had the kind of smile that could freeze antifreeze. Their house was a monument to excess, all glass and steel angles, complete with a lawn so aggressively manicured it looked artificial. They'd bulldozed every tree on their 2-acre lot for unobstructed mountain views, because apparently nothing says mountain living like destroying the actual mountain. But there was something else in Victoria's eyes when she looked at our property, something I'd seen before in boardrooms and country clubs, at parent-teacher conferences and city council meetings. That look that said, "You people don't belong here." Not in those exact words, of course. People like Victoria are far too sophisticated for overt racism. They prefer the subtle knife to the obvious club. The first shot across our bow came in late spring 2023, a certified letter delivered with all the warmth of a tax lien notice. Aesthetic compliance violation, it read, followed by 4 pages of demands that made my blood pressure spike. Fresh stain on all 11 cabins, $18,000, new community-appropriate signage, $9,500, landscaping improvements to match neighborhood standards, $14,000 parking area enhancement, $8,500. Total damage, $50,000 we didn't have, with a 45-day deadline that might as well have been 45 minutes. I drove over to Victoria's Glass Palace to discuss a reasonable timeline. The chemical smell of fresh mulch and lawn treatments hit me before I even parked. When she answered the door, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly when she saw me. That micro-expression of surprise that said she'd been expecting someone else, someone who looked more like the landscaper than the property owner. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice carrying the kind of practiced courtesy that somehow managed to sound condescending. "I assume you're here about the compliance notice." "Yes, ma'am. We're willing to make improvements, but we need time to—" "I'm afraid time is a luxury we can't afford," she interrupted, her smile never wavering. "Property values in this area have increased substantially. We simply cannot allow anachronistic elements to undermine everyone's investment." Anachronistic elements. That's how she described a fishing lodge that had been here since before her parents were born. Walking back to my truck, gravel crunching under my boots, I already knew this woman wasn't interested in reasonable solutions. She wanted submission. And that's something the Washington family has never been good at providing. By August, I'd managed to scrape together enough to stain 6 of the 11 cabins. The smell of fresh cedar should have been satisfying. Instead, it felt like feeding coins into a rigged slot machine. I called the HOA management company, hoping my good faith effort would buy time for the remaining work. "I'll pass your request to the board, Mr. Washington," said Jenny, the management secretary, sounding genuinely sympathetic. "I'm sure they'll be reasonable about an extension." Poor Jenny. She had no idea she was working for sociopaths. 3 days later, another certified letter arrived like a legal hand grenade. Not only were they rejecting my extension request, but they'd somehow discovered a buffet of new violations. Our dock, built in 1953, suddenly extended impermissibly into the waterway. The gravel parking area where families had parked for decades now lacked proper drainage permits. Even our evening campfire circle, where kids had roasted marshmallows under the stars for generations, somehow violated open flame ordinances. Daily fines started at $750 per violation. With 5 active violations, we were bleeding $3,750 every single day. That's more than most families make in a month. Diana found me at the kitchen table at midnight, calculator in hand, watching our life savings evaporate in real time. $112,500 a month, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. That's when I remembered something my great-grandfather used to say. When white folks try to steal your land, first thing you do is check who really owns it. Smart man, even though he never saw the inside of a law school. I spent the next week in the courthouse basement, digging through records that probably hadn't been touched since Carter was president. The elderly black clerk, Mrs. Henderson, helped me navigate filing systems that looked organized by someone with a grudge against alphabetical order. What I found made me laugh out loud, probably the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. Our lodge predated every zoning ordinance by 40 years. We had legal non-conforming status, grandfather protection stronger than Superman's cape. The dock, parking area, and fire pit were all protected under county law. Every single fine they were charging was as legally valid as monopoly money. I fired off a certified letter to their attorney with copies of relevant statutes, demanding immediate cessation of all invalid fines. For 24 hours, I actually thought I'd won. Then my phone rang. "Mr. Washington, this is Victoria Sterling." Her voice carried that fake sweetness that probably made dentists rich. "While your historical research is interesting, we've had to implement new safety protocols. The new emergency rule, passed at a special meeting I conveniently wasn't notified about, required all commercial properties to carry $3 million in liability insurance. Our current policy covered $750,000, which had been industry standard and perfectly adequate for decades. The quotes I received made my chest tight. $24,000 additional per year. Surely you understand, Victoria continued, manufactured concern dripping from every word, that public safety transcends sentimental attachments to outdated business models. Right there, listening to her dismiss 4 generations of family history as sentimental attachment, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about aesthetics or safety. This was about money, power, and something darker. The age-old story of powerful white folks deciding that black success was somehow incompatible with their vision of paradise. But they'd picked the wrong family to play that game with. I reached out to our longtime guests through our Facebook page, creating a Save Washington Lodge group that exploded to 1,200 members in 3 weeks. Black families who'd been coming here for generations started sharing stories and photos that made my eyes water. The local black newspaper picked up our story with a headline that made me proud: Historic Lodge Under Siege When Property Values Meet Racial Reality. But even as our community rallied, I could practically hear Victoria's heels clicking across her marble floors as she plotted her next move. And trust me, she wasn't done, not by a long shot. The insurance victory lasted exactly 10 days before Victoria struck back with the subtlety of a freight train. I'd found a loophole through an umbrella policy that boosted our coverage to $3 million for $6,800 instead of $24,000. When I walked into that September board meeting with the certificate in hand, watching Victoria's mask slip for just a microsecond, I felt like David landing his first stone. "How efficient," she said, her voice tight as piano wire. "It's wonderful to see compliance with our safety requirements." But her eyes promised war. Labor Day weekend brought families from 5 states for our annual fish fry and talent show, a tradition that started when my great-grandfather needed entertainment during a rainy week in 1955. The smell of fried catfish and the sound of children's laughter should have made it perfect. Instead, I watched a stranger with a clipboard prowling our property like a health inspector at a gas station hot dog stand. "Property assessment," he announced when I approached, barely looking up from his notes. "Board-authorized inspection for compliance verification." I'd bet my last dollar this guy had never seen the inside of a building code manual, but he was thorough as cancer. 53 violations magically appeared over 4 days. A loose handrail on cabin 7 that our maintenance log showed was scheduled for repair the following week. A minor electrical issue in the office that our licensed electrician confirmed was actually up to code. Fire extinguishers 6 weeks past inspection, something that happens to every business occasionally and typically results in a gentle reminder, not a violation. Even the rope swing kids had been using for 30 years suddenly became an unauthorized recreational hazard requiring immediate removal. What really burned me was watching him interrupt families' vacations. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher from Atlanta, who'd been bringing her grandchildren here for 12 years, had to move her car 4 times because it was suddenly blocking emergency access routes that had never existed before that weekend. "This is harassment," I told the inspector after he cited us for having inadequate signage on a bathroom that was clearly marked and had been in the same location since the Johnson administration. He shrugged. "I don't make the rules, buddy. I just enforce them. But here's the thing about pushing a man too far, especially a black man who's spent his whole life being pushed. Eventually, you stop retreating and start hunting." I called my paralegal friend, Janet Blackwood, a sister who could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments if you gave her enough coffee and motivation. For $750, she agreed to dissect our HOA's governing documents with surgical precision. What she found over the next week explained Victoria's confidence in her little power games. The original covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the constitution of any HOA, required a 2/3 majority vote of all property owners for any rule changes affecting commercial properties. But the insurance rule had been passed with only 15 of 52 residents present, all from Mountain Vista Estates. "They can't railroad you with a stacked meeting," Janet explained, her finger tracing the relevant clause. "This is basic corporate governance. You've got grounds to challenge every rule they've passed in the last 18 months. Meanwhile, the regional news station caught wind of our story. The reporter, a sharp-eyed black woman named Keisha Morris, interviewed 3 generations of the Johnson family who'd been coming here since the 1970s. "This place is sacred to us," old Frank Johnson told the camera, his weathered hands gesturing toward the lake. My children learned to fish in that water. My grandchildren caught their first bass off that dock. Now, some lawyer from Atlanta wants to erase all that because it doesn't match her marble countertops. When they asked Victoria for comment, she declined an on-camera interview but issued a written statement. The Mountain Vista community is committed to preserving property values and maintaining safety standards for all residents, regardless of personal attachments to legacy properties. That phrase, regardless of personal attachments, went viral in the Black community. Social media exploded with #SaveWashingtonLodge, and suddenly our little mountain drama was becoming a symbol of something much larger. But I was learning that every victory came with a price. When I presented the board with our legal challenge to their voting procedures, demanding a proper recount on the insurance rule, Victoria's response was swift and vicious. Property inspections tripled. Code enforcement officers started appearing bi-weekly. Our propane supplier received mysterious calls questioning our safety record. Even our longtime food distributor got contacted by someone claiming to represent the state health department, suggesting they might want to reconsider their client relationships. Diana found me in the office one evening, staring at a stack of violation notices that looked like a phone book. "Maybe we should consider their offer," she said quietly. The developer had called again, raising his bid to $850,000. The kids could go to better schools. We could start fresh somewhere else. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, my great-grandfather shaking hands with our first white guest in 1962, both men grinning like they'd just solved racism with a handshake and a fishing rod. "No," I said. "They want us gone. They're going to have to try a lot harder than this." October 12th, 3:15 a.m. I'll remember those numbers for the rest of my life, burned into my memory like the flames that jolted me from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Diana shook me awake, her voice cutting through my dreams like a smoke alarm. "Jerome, wake up. Something's burning." The orange glow through our bedroom window told the whole story before my feet hit the floor. Our boathouse, 90 years of family history, irreplaceable fishing equipment, and my great-grandfather's handcrafted rods, was going up like a Viking funeral, the acrid smell of burning cedar mixed with melting fiberglass, and something else that made my stomach clench. I called 911 while pulling on jeans and boots, but by the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the boathouse was a total loss. 3 separate burn patterns, the fire chief noted grimly, which meant one thing: arson. What happened next still makes my blood boil. At 7:30 a.m., barely 4 hours after the fire, I arrived at the smoldering ruins to meet the insurance investigator, and there, standing beside the smoking wreckage with a to-go coffee cup, wearing designer athletic wear, like she was heading to yoga class, was Victoria Sterling. "Morning walk," she explained with a smile that belonged in a shark tank. "Terrible tragedy, though. I have to say that old boathouse was quite a fire hazard. Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise, an opportunity for more appropriate waterfront structures." Richard appeared 5 minutes later with a digital camera, claiming he was documenting the damage for community insurance purposes. When the fire investigator asked why they were present before I'd even been officially notified, Richard's face went redder than a sunburned tourist. Carol, the insurance investigator, a no-nonsense black woman who'd clearly seen every kind of fraud imaginable, raised an eyebrow at their convenient presence. "Interesting timing for a morning walk," she observed dryly, "considering this isn't anywhere near your usual route. I spent the next week playing detective, and what I found connected dots I'd hoped would never connect. Security footage from the marina next door showed a figure in dark clothing climbing our fence at 3:05 a.m. The build looked suspiciously like Richard, though the face was obscured. Then the anonymous envelope appeared on my office desk. No postmark, no return address, just photos of Richard at Morton's Hardware the day before the fire, purchasing accelerant and a timer device. The receipt was still attached, his credit card signature clear as daylight. The note inside was brief. "Some of us are disgusted by what they're doing. A neighbor who believes in justice." We had allies inside Mountain Vista Estates, people who were watching this corruption unfold and finally getting sick enough to act. But proving arson and collecting insurance money were different battles. Our policy would cover the $35,000 boathouse replacement, but only after receiving an HOA compliance certificate. Guess who refused to sign it? Given the fire's suspicious circumstances, Victoria announced at the next board meeting, We have concerns about property management practices that may have contributed to this unfortunate incident. She was holding our insurance money hostage until we completed every compliance demand. We couldn't rebuild without insurance, couldn't get insurance without compliance, and couldn't afford compliance without the insurance money. Perfect trap, and she knew it. The emergency board meeting she called 3 days later felt like watching a lynching disguised as due process. New rule: all commercial properties must install $55,000 sprinkler systems within 45 days. The kicker? Recent incidents have voided all grandfathering exemptions. Public safety, she declared with the authority of someone who'd never fought a fire in her life, transcends sentimental attachments to outdated properties. That night, Diana and I sat in our kitchen, calculator between us like evidence in a murder trial. The numbers were devastating. Sprinkler system, compliance improvements, legal fees, lost revenue from cancelled bookings due to bad publicity. We were looking at financial ruin no matter which direction we turned. The developer's offer is still on the table, Diana said quietly. $850,000 would cover our debts and give us something to start over with. I stared at the photo of my great-grandfather on the refrigerator, him teaching my grandfather to fish at the same dock they were trying to destroy. 4 generations of Washingtons had fought to keep this place alive through Jim Crow, economic downturns, changing vacation patterns, family emergencies. We'd survived it all. But we'd never faced enemies this calculated, this willing to destroy everything we'd built just to erase us from their perfect picture. No, I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. They want a war? They'll get one. But I'm done playing defense. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Janet, asking her to request every financial document the HOA had generated in 5 years. The second was to the county sheriff, reporting suspected arson with photographic evidence. The third was to Keisha Morris, telling her I was ready to go nuclear with a story that would expose the whole rotten system. If Victoria wanted to play hardball, she was about to learn that some of us had been practicing a lot longer than she realized. 4 days later, armed with North Carolina's public records law and Janet's legal expertise, I walked into the management company's office like a federal marshal with a search warrant. The receptionist's nervous smile told me everything I needed to know about how unusual these requests were. "We'll need several days to compile everything," she stammered, clearly hoping I'd give up and disappear. "State law says 72 hours maximum," Janet replied smoothly, sliding the official request across the desk. "We'll be back Friday at 2 p.m. What we hauled out of there in 6 bankers' boxes would have made Bernie Madoff's accountant blush with envy. I spread the documents across my kitchen table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle from hell, and the picture that emerged made my blood run cold. Over 5 years, our HOA had collected $2.8 million from all property owners. The reserve fund, money set aside for emergencies and major repairs, should have contained at least $950,000. The actual balance, $31,000. Someone had made $1.4 million disappear into thin air. The money trail led through a maze of inflated contracts and phantom expenses that would have impressed organized crime. Victoria's nephew in Atlanta ran the landscaping company that charged $12,000 monthly for services any honest contractor would provide for $4,500. Snow removal costs hit $22,000 per season for work that required minimal equipment, but somehow employed 4 full-time crews. But the personal enrichment scheme made my jaw drop. Victoria's home landscaping assessment had been paid with HOA funds, $89,000 for what looked like stolen from a resort. Richard's Boat Dock construction, a $48,000 project that somehow qualified as a community waterfront enhancement. Board members had attended HOA conferences at luxury resorts in Maui and the Bahamas, billing $34,000 in educational expenses over 3 years. Every invoice, every receipt, every fraudulent expense had been rubber-stamped by a board that treated our community funds like their personal ATM. Then I found the nuclear bomb buried in their management contracts, a clause giving the HOA power to force property sales if any owner created ongoing financial burdens for the association. Properties unable to pay accumulated fines could be seized and sold to recover costs. Richard owned something called Blue Ridge Properties LLC, 3 guesses who was positioned to buy Washington Lodge for pennies on the dollar once they'd manufactured enough financial burden to justify seizure. The timeline was laid out in black and white emails. Drive Jerome out by spring, acquire the property for $500,000 through their shell company, demolish everything for luxury condos. 200 new HOA units meant nearly $1.8 million in additional annual dues revenue. I wasn't their first target. I was just the most visible domino. 4 other pre-existing properties had received similar harassment campaigns. The auto shop, the antique store, the small organic farm, the art gallery, all owned by people who didn't fit Mountain Vista's demographic vision, all sitting on prime real estate that could be improved with luxury development. Janet's face went ashen as we connected the dots. Jerome, this isn't just HOA abuse. This is organized racketeering, possibly with civil rights violations. These people could face federal prison. That night, I sat in my great-grandfather's chair, staring at the lake where 4 generations of black children had learned to swim safely, without fear, without judgment. The moonlight on the water looked the same as it had a century ago, but everything else had changed. We weren't just fighting for our lodge anymore. We were fighting for the soul of our community, for the radical idea that black families deserved to hold on to the little piece of paradise their ancestors had carved out of a hostile world. For the first time in months, I smiled, not from happiness, but because I finally understood the game they were playing. Once you know the rules, you can figure out how to win. They'd made one crucial mistake in their perfect crime. They'd gotten so greedy, so confident in their corruption, that they'd documented everything. Every fraudulent expense, every inflated contract, every step of their property grab conspiracy was sitting in those boxes, signed and dated like a confession. Victoria thought she was playing chess with some country boy who'd fold under pressure. She was about to learn that some of us play a much longer, much deadlier game. The next morning I called a war council. Janet arrived first, her paralegal training evident in the color-coded files she carried like ammunition. Marcus followed, our CPA for 15 years, who'd built a forensic accounting practice that had taken down 5 embezzling executives. Keisha Morris brought decades of investigative journalism experience. Even Sheriff Deputy Williams showed up on his day off, explaining that some things transcend jurisdictional boundaries. We spread everything across the lodge's conference room like generals planning D-Day. "This is beautiful work," Marcus said, studying the financial documents with professional appreciation. They documented everything, every fraudulent transaction, every kickback, every personal expense. It's like they wanted to get caught. Keisha was already on her laptop, cross-referencing names and shell companies. "I've seen this pattern in municipal corruption cases. They create webs of fake businesses, inflate every contract, and skim from multiple revenue streams. The arrogance is always their downfall." But Janet had identified our real weapon, the annual budget meeting scheduled for December 20th. "Every property owner gets to vote on next year's budget and board positions," she explained, pointing to the HOA bylaws. 52 Mountain Vista homes plus 8 other properties, including yours. You need 31 votes to control everything. Fire the management company, recall the board, elect honest leadership. Marcus ran numbers while Keisha worked her media contacts. Each property owner has been overcharged an average of $12,000 over 5 years due to inflated contracts. When people realize they can get refunds plus dramatically lower dues, you'll have all the votes you need. Our strategy crystallized: expose the corruption publicly before the meeting, rally every property owner to attend, then seize control through legitimate democratic process. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating to their scheme. Keisha's phone buzzed with a text that made her grin. Channel 7's investigative unit wants to do a 3-part series. They're calling it HOA Corruption, a statewide crisis. Your case will anchor the whole thing, airing the week before your budget meeting. Meanwhile, our anonymous allies inside Mountain Vista were feeding us intelligence that would have made the CIA envious. Board meeting recordings, private conversations, email screenshots showing the conspiracy in their own words. The smoking gun recording made my hands shake, Richard caught on tape. "Once we control that waterfront, we're sitting on a $3 million gold mine. These people don't understand what they're sitting on. We're practically doing them a favor." Victoria's voice followed. "The Washington acquisition is just phase 1. We'll systematically remove every non-conforming property and rebuild this entire area properly. Mountain living for the right kind of people. The right kind of people." There it was, finally said out loud. But their arrogance was becoming our ammunition. Deputy Williams reviewed our evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd built solid court cases. Criminal charges for embezzlement and conspiracy are slam dunks. Civil recovery under RICO will triple damages. File both simultaneously, the pressure will make them fold like lawn chairs. Community organizing felt like something from the civil rights era. Fish fry fundraisers where I presented financial evidence in charts simple enough for grade schoolers to understand. Carpools to ensure maximum turnout at the budget meeting. Even voting guides for new board candidates we'd recruited from across the community. The venue battle proved crucial. Victoria wanted the meeting in their small clubhouse. Capacity 25 people. I demanded the high school gymnasium, citing state law requiring adequate accommodation for all eligible voters. When she tried to refuse, Janet threatened immediate federal intervention. Public meetings must be actually public, Janet explained to the panicking board. Try to exclude voters, and you'll face civil rights violations on top of everything else. Diana found me in the office late one night, surrounded by evidence boxes and presentation materials. You look different, she said, confident again. She was right. For months I'd been playing defense, reacting to their attacks, always one step behind. Now I was setting the agenda, choosing the battlefield, controlling the narrative, the hunter instead of the hunted. December 20th, I told her. Everything changes December 20th. November brought Victoria's desperation like a winter storm moving in from hell. Anonymous flyers started appearing overnight, printed on expensive paper that screamed professional hit job. Headlines made my stomach churn. Lodge owner under federal investigation for tax evasion. Photos of our fire damage with misleading captions about negligent fire hazards endangering families. Fake quotes from concerned former guests describing declining standards and unsafe conditions. Keisha's investigative instincts kicked in immediately. She traced the printing to a shop in Asheville where security footage showed Richard making copies at midnight, looking around nervously like a teenager buying contraband. Amateur hour, Keisha muttered, reviewing the footage. These people watch too many crime shows. But the smear campaign was just the opening move. The developer appeared at my door personally 4 days later, offering a handshake and a smile that probably cost 50 grand in dental work. He'd driven up in a Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses, wearing a suit that screamed, "I eat small businesses for breakfast." Jerome Washington, I'm David Morrison with Mountain Vista Development. I have a proposition that might interest you. His improved offer hit like a financial sledgehammer, $1.1 million cash, with all HOA fines and legal issues mysteriously disappearing upon sale. The timing was too convenient, the solution too perfect. I recorded the entire conversation. North Carolina's one-party consent law had become my best friend. There's been an understanding with the current board, he admitted when I pressed for details. Sometimes these community disputes can be resolved through mutually beneficial arrangements. Thanks, I replied, keeping my voice steady as granite, but I'm not for sale at any price. His smile cracked like cheap paint. That's unfortunate. I hope you'll reconsider before circumstances become more challenging. Circumstances became challenging within the week. Our internet went down when excavation equipment accidentally cut the fiber line 3 times. Phone service got disrupted so frequently that Verizon started joking about installing armored cables. The health inspector showed up based on anonymous complaints that turned out to be completely fabricated. Trail cameras I'd installed after the arson caught Richard's BMW near our property at 2 a.m., headlights off, creeping along the fence line like a predator scouting prey. Then came legal intimidation that showed exactly how scared they'd become. Their attorney's cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail, demanding I stop my campaign of racial harassment against respected community leaders. They threatened a $150,000 defamation lawsuit if I continued spreading racist accusations and stalking board members. Janet's response was a work of art, a preview of our evidence portfolio that made their lawyer go so quiet you could hear his billable hours ticking. We never heard from him again. The social media war escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Fake Facebook profiles popped up overnight, attacking everything from my military service to Diana's career as a social worker. Someone posted photos of our kids with captions questioning my fitness as a role model for young black men. When attacks targeted my family directly, something primal and dangerous awakened inside me, threatened my business, my property, even my reputation. But come after my wife and children, and you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Our #Save Washington Lodge supporters fought back hard, exposing fake profiles and tracing IP addresses back to Mountain Vista Estates. The internet mob turned on its creators faster than a pack of wolves. But the financial pressure campaign nearly broke us. The HOA suddenly demanded immediate payment of all accumulated fines. $156,000. Lien preparation notices went to our bank, threatening our credit line. Our insurance company received anonymous tips about safety violations that required 3 separate inspections to debunk. Even our longtime suppliers started getting mysterious calls, questioning our creditworthiness and suggesting they might want to protect themselves by demanding cash up front. I realized this was coordinated economic warfare designed to force operational shutdown before the budget meeting. Death by 1,000 cuts, hoping we'd bleed out before we could expose them, but the community counter-response surprised everyone, including me. Keisha's 3-part series launched like journalistic carpet bombing, HOA corruption, the Washington Lodge War. Part 1 exposed the financial fraud. Part 2 detailed the harassment campaign with clear racial undertones. Part 3 connected everything to the arson investigation and pending federal referral. Social media exploded. The story got shared 5,000 times in the first week, then picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, our little mountain battle was becoming a symbol of HOA abuse and racial injustice nationwide. But Victoria's final gambit nearly shattered my resolve. Thanksgiving week brought the attack that crossed every line. Our main water line mysteriously broke, flooding the lodge's main building and destroying computers, guest records, and irreplaceable family photographs dating back to the 1920s. The repair crew found clean pipe cuts, tool marks that told the story of deliberate sabotage. I stood in ankle-deep water, watching 90 years of black family history dissolving into muddy soup, and felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with water pipes. Diana found me there at 2 a.m., salvaging what I could from the wreckage. "They're not going to stop," she whispered, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "They'll keep attacking until we're destroyed." I looked at a waterlogged photo of my great-grandfather, with his first integrated fishing party in 1963, black and white families standing together on our dock, children holding fish with proud grins, adults sharing something precious and rare for that era. "No," I said, surprised by the steel in my voice. "They just made their biggest mistake. They've shown me exactly what kind of people they really are." Diana's hand found mine in the cold water. "Time to show them what kind of man you are." December 10th hit like a media avalanche that buried Victoria's perfect world under an avalanche of truth. Channel 7's investigative series aired during prime time, with our story as the devastating centerpiece of a statewide corruption epidemic. The reporter had done her homework, interviewing financial experts who called our case textbook racketeering with clear discriminatory elements, and civil rights attorneys who termed it economic racism disguised as property management. When they knocked on Victoria's door for comment, she hid behind her curtains like a vampire avoiding daylight. Richard's no comment lasted exactly 2 seconds before he slammed the door so hard it cracked the glass. The story went viral overnight. Washington Lodge Justice started trending nationally, with our mountain drama becoming a symbol of HOA tyranny and racial injustice everywhere. But media attention brought something I'd never expected: federal resources. The district attorney announced a criminal investigation the next morning, citing overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud with possible civil rights violations. The state attorney general opened a parallel investigation into management company practices. Even the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit requested copies of our documentation. My local fight had accidentally become a federal case, bringing legal firepower I could never have afforded alone. Victoria's response was pure panic disguised as procedure. An emergency board meeting was called to cancel the December 20th budget meeting, claiming security concerns due to media circus. But Janet had anticipated this move, filing a federal court injunction before Victoria finished typing the notice. "Annual budget meetings are federally protected rights," the judge ruled curtly. "The defendants will proceed as scheduled with appropriate federal marshals for security, if necessary." Watching Victoria's face when the bailiff delivered that ruling was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. Richard's desperation reached criminal stupidity 3 days later. Our security cameras caught him loading boxes of financial records into a commercial shredding truck behind the management office. Keisha's photographer happened to be staking out the building. Sometimes preparation and luck create their own miracles. Federal agents intercepted the truck before it reached the shredding facility, recovering evidence that included handwritten notes about eliminating paper trails, and Costa Rica contingency plans. Richard earned himself federal obstruction charges on top of everything else. The community mobilization felt like democracy in action. 600 people planned to attend our budget meeting in a venue that seated 250. Media confirmed attendance from 8 states. The governor's office sent observers. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund sent attorneys. I organized shuttle service from 3 parking areas just to accommodate the crowd. Even Mountain Vista residents were turning against their leadership. The anonymous recordings our allies provided painted a picture of board members in complete meltdown, discussing asset transfers to offshore accounts and emergency flights to non-extradition countries. One recording made my blood freeze, Victoria strategizing about liquidating assets and relocating to Richard's compound in Paraguay if this gets federal attention. I shared that intelligence with law enforcement immediately. Flight risk was now a very real concern. The personal attacks reached fever pitch in the final week. Someone hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my military service, contacting old army buddies fishing for negative stories. Diana's social work supervisor received harassing calls claiming she was racially biased against white clients. Anonymous CPS reports claimed I was an unfit parent due to financial instability and radical political activities. When they filed false child welfare reports against my family, something primitive and deadly awakened inside me. Attack my business, my reputation, even my property, but threaten my children's welfare with fabricated accusations, and you've entered territory where civilized rules no longer apply. The CPS investigator closed the case within hours, noting it was clearly malicious and racially motivated, but the damage was done. My kids had to endure questions at school about whether their father was really a criminal. That night, Zoe asked quietly, "Dad, are we going to lose everything?" I sat on her bed looking at this brilliant young woman who'd grown up thinking America was basically fair and reasonable, watching that innocence crumble in real time. "No, sweetheart, but we're going to learn something important about fighting for what's right, even when powerful people want us to disappear." Marcus chimed in from across the room. "Are you going to beat them?" I thought about my great-grandfather's stories of fighting the Klan when they tried to burn him out in 1967. He'd won by being tougher and smarter than the terrorists, not by being nicer. "Yes, son, I'm going to beat them." December 19th brought the final intimidation attempt. Motorcycles circled our property from 11 p.m. until 4 a.m., revving engines and laying rubber on our access road. Anonymous death threats filled our voicemail, some using language that would have made 1950s segregationists proud. Someone spray-painted "Go back where you came from" on our main sign. The FBI assigned protective detail to our property, but I wasn't scared anymore. I'd faced real danger in Afghanistan, in places where people shot back. A bunch of suburban wannabe tough guys on motorcycles didn't even register on my threat assessment scale. Besides, their desperation was showing. People who are winning don't resort to racial slurs and midnight terror campaigns. They were terrified of tomorrow's meeting, and their fear was making them stupid. I spent that final evening with my family at the lodge, ignoring the ringing phone and watching sunset paint the lake in colors that had looked the same when my great-grandfather first claimed this piece of paradise. The moonlight on the water was timeless, but everything else was about to change. December 20th dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for a reckoning. I arrived at the high school gymnasium at sunrise to set up presentation equipment, and the parking lot was already packed. People had driven from 6 states to witness this showdown. Media trucks lined the street like election night coverage. As I tested the microphone and loaded my evidence slides, I felt the calm that comes before decisive action. My great-grandfather's worn Bible sat in my jacket pocket for strength, hands that had prayed for justice in a world that rarely provided it. The war was over, time to collect the victory. 3 p.m. arrived like Judgment Day. The gymnasium was packed beyond fire marshal recommendations, with people standing 5 deep along the walls and spilling into the hallways. 4 TV crews had claimed the front corner, their cameras aimed like artillery at the board table where Victoria sat rigid as a marble statue. Richard fidgeted beside her, sweat beading on his forehead despite the December chill. I walked down the center aisle, carrying my laptop and the manila folder that had become nationally famous, feeling 600 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. The silence was so complete you could hear the heating system humming overhead. Victoria tried to seize control before I reached the podium, her voice sharp with manufactured authority. Due to capacity concerns and security considerations, we'll limit public comment to 10 minutes total. Janet's objection cut through the air like a blade. Federal law requires reasonable opportunity for public input on budget matters affecting civil rights. You cannot limit legitimate participation. FBI agent Davidson, stationed prominently near the stage, nodded his confirmation. Federal requirement, ma'am, full hearing or no meeting at all. Victoria's first defeat, and we hadn't even started. I connected my laptop to the projection system with the calm precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. The first slide appeared on the wall behind me. Washington Lodge HOA Financial Analysis, 2018 to 2023 inches. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed gymnasium, I'm here to discuss our association's finances. What you're about to see will shock you. Second slide, total collected from all property owners, $2.8 million. Total legitimately spent, $1.4 million. Audible gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's face had gone from red to pale green. Third slide, reserve fund legal requirement, $950,000. Actual balance, $31,000. A woman in the third row shouted, "Where's our money?" Others took up the cry until Agent Davidson raised his hand for quiet. Fourth slide, management company overcharges, $687,000 over 5 years. The room erupted. People were standing, pointing at the board table, voices rising in righteous anger. But I wasn't finished. Now let's talk about where your money really went. The personal enrichment evidence hit like a nuclear bomb. Victoria's $89,000 landscaping. Richard's $48,000 boat dock. Board members' luxury resort conferences in Hawaii, Maui, and the Bahamas. But the smoking gun was the audio recording. I have one final piece of evidence, I announced, my voice cutting through the crowd noise like a church bell. This recording was made at a private board meeting last month. Richard's voice filled the gymnasium through the sound system. Once we control that waterfront, we're sitting on a $3 million gold mine. These people don't understand what they're sitting on. The silence was deafening. Then Victoria's voice, dripping with contempt. The Washington acquisition is just phase 1. We'll systematically remove every non-conforming property and rebuild this entire area properly. Mountain living for the right kind of people. The explosion of outrage shook the building. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing fingers. A retired teacher named Mrs. Johnson yelled, "The right kind of people? What kind of racist garbage is that?" Someone else shouted, "Thieves and bigots." Richard bolted for the exit like a rabbit spotting a hawk, but Agent Davidson's partner was stationed at the door. No escape today. Victoria tried desperately to regain control. These are accounting errors, misunderstandings taken out of context. "Ma'am," I interrupted, projecting bank records onto the wall, "these are your signatures on fraudulent expense reports, your family's shell companies, your personal benefits paid with community funds." The room laughed, actually laughed at her obvious lies. The sound was brutal, dismissive, final. The votes came swift as summer lightning. Motion to remove the entire board. 51 in favor, 4 opposed. Motion to terminate the management company. 53 in favor, 2 opposed. Motion to hire independent auditors and forensic accountants. Unanimous. Motion to pursue criminal and civil rights charges. 52 in favor, 3 abstentions. Motion to elect Jerome Washington as interim board president. Acclamation so loud it rattled windows. That's when the handcuffs came out. FBI agents approached the board table with federal arrest warrants. As Agent Davidson read charges, Victoria Sterling, Richard Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and civil rights violations under federal housing law. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked as the metal bracelets clicked around her wrists. "This is a mistake. I'm an attorney. I know my rights." "Yes, ma'am," Agent Davidson replied calmly. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters surrounded me as the board members were led away, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. "How does it feel to expose this corruption?" Channel 7's reporter asked. "This was never about revenge," I replied, keeping my voice steady and measured. "This was about justice, about protecting our community from predators who thought they could steal and discriminate with impunity." As Victoria was led past in handcuffs, she finally made eye contact, a look of pure hatred that told me everything I needed to know about her true character. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as the meeting officially adjourned. People surrounded me, offering congratulations, shaking hands, patting my back. Diana appeared at my side, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, vindication, and pride. A local barbecue restaurant owner announced free dinner for everyone who'd attended. Children asked for my autograph like I was some kind of hero, though I felt more like a man who'd simply done what needed doing. As the gymnasium emptied and media packed their equipment, I stood alone for a moment in the space where justice had finally been served. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through windows felt warm on my face, like approval from ancestors who'd fought similar battles with fewer resources and longer odds. My great-grandfather would have been proud, not just of the victory, but of how we'd won it, with truth, preparation, and the courage to stand up when it mattered most. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, each piece of justice clicking into place with satisfying precision. Federal proceedings moved faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and zero public sympathy, Victoria pleaded guilty to avoid racketeering charges, 4 years in federal prison plus full restitution. Richard flipped on his co-conspirators to save his own skin, earning 2 years and permanent exclusion from any HOA leadership role. The management company owner got indicted in a federal corruption case spanning 7 states. Our little mountain drama was part of a much bigger criminal enterprise targeting communities of color nationwide. But the real victory was financial recovery that exceeded our wildest hopes. Court-ordered restitution totaled $1.7 million, money that came flooding back to property owners who'd been systematically robbed for years. Each family received an average refund of $28,000. Diana cried when our check arrived, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of financial security returning to our lives after years of siege. Our legal fees got covered by recovered funds. The insurance settlement for the arson finally came through, letting us rebuild the boathouse better than before. For the first time in decades, Washington Lodge was completely debt-free. The community transformation felt like watching a neighborhood heal from a long illness. We elected a new HOA board representing the entire community, not just Mountain Vista, but every property owner. Monthly dues dropped from $450 to $200 after we hired an honest local management company at 60% of the previous cost. I voluntarily stepped down as board president once reforms were implemented. I'm a lodge owner, not a politician, and I'd accomplished what I set out to do: clean house and restore justice. Personal healing came slower but deeper than financial recovery. Diana's stress-related health problems disappeared almost overnight once the harassment stopped. Our kids wrote award-winning school essays about standing up to bullies and bigots that got published in national magazines. We took our first real vacation in 3 years, a week at Martha's Vineyard where nobody questioned our right to be there or tried to burn down our livelihood. My marriage emerged stronger than ever. Nothing tests a relationship like sustained crisis under racial pressure, and Diana and I had passed that test with flying colors. But the ripple effects reached far beyond our mountain community. My phone started ringing with calls from HOA victims across 20 states, many of them people of color facing similar harassment campaigns. I began consulting pro bono, sharing strategies and legal knowledge that had saved our lodge. The state legislature invited me to testify about HOA reform legislation. The Washington Lodge Act now requires annual financial audits, transparency in all dealings, and federal civil rights protections. 18 states have introduced similar laws. I never expected to become a civil rights activist, but sometimes ordinary people have to do extraordinary things to protect what matters. Washington Lodge experienced a renaissance that surprised everyone, including me. Bookings increased 60% due to positive media attention. The lodge that fought injustice and won became our unofficial marketing slogan, attracting guests who wanted to support the family that beat the system. We added new amenities funded by restitution money and insurance settlements. The county designated our original lodge as a civil rights landmark, ensuring it can never be demolished for condos. There's now a 2-year waiting list for summer reservations, but the initiative I'm most proud of came from using part of our restitution to establish the Samuel Washington Community Justice Fund, named after my great-grandfather. We provide legal aid for families facing HOA discrimination, college scholarships for students studying civil rights law, and funding for an annual Justice Day festival celebrating the ongoing fight for equality. We also partnered with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to create permanent protection for our lake ecosystem. No matter who owns this property in the future, it can never be overdeveloped or restricted based on race. The knowledge I gained fighting this corruption could fill a textbook. Every HOA member in America should demand independent financial audits every year, not board-controlled reviews. Monthly statements should show actual versus budgeted expenses in detail. When hiring management companies, get competitive bids and check references with multiple communities. Most importantly, watch for patterns of selective enforcement that target minority property owners. Document everything, build coalitions, and never assume discrimination is legal just because it's subtle. Our story became required reading in civil rights law classes and featured in a documentary called When Property Rights Meet Civil Rights. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund cites our victory as proof that organized communities can defeat organized bigotry. 8 months after the budget meeting, I received a letter from a Latino farming family in Colorado facing identical tactics. They're trying to foreclose on our ranch using the same playbook, but targeting Spanish speakers who they think won't fight back. Diana found me reading it at the kitchen table. Road trip, she asked with a smile that told me she already knew my answer. Because here's what I learned from this whole nightmare. Bullies and bigots only win when good people stay silent. They count on your fear, your isolation, your assumption that you can't fight back against people with money, power, and prejudice. But they're wrong. When ordinary citizens organize, document everything, and refuse to back down, justice usually wins. It's not easy, it's not quick, and it definitely costs you sleep and peace of mind. But it works. So, if you're dealing with HOA corruption, especially if you suspect racial bias, remember, you're not alone, you're not powerless, and you don't have to take it. Document everything. Build alliances across racial lines. Show up to meetings. Vote in elections. And when they threaten you, don't get scared. Get organized. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below, especially if you've noticed patterns of racial discrimination disguised as property standards. Let's see how far this epidemic has spread. Hit that subscribe button for more justice stories, because there are a lot more battles to fight and a lot more bullies who need to learn that their time is up. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. I want to see our community of accountability spreading coast to coast. Remember, they count on your silence. Don't give them that power. Thanks for standing with us. If you enjoyed seeing justice served and corruption exposed, smash that like button, sound off in the comments, and subscribe to catch next week's story. You don't want to miss it, because the fight for justice never ends. It just finds new battlefields.